Welcome, everyone. Today, let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever listened to English and felt like the words were running too fast? You know the vocabulary. You understand the grammar. But when native speakers talk, everything suddenly becomes a blur of sound. It feels like they are speaking one long word. If you have ever felt that way, you are not alone. For a long time, I had the same problem. I could read English quite well. I could even write a decent paragraph. But listening? That was a completely different story. When people spoke at normal speed, my brain simply could not keep up. I missed words. I misunderstood sentences. And sometimes, I understood nothing at all. For a while, I thought maybe my listening was just bad. Maybe I didn't have the talent. But over time, I discovered something important. Listening is not magic, and it is definitely not talent. Listening is a skill. And like every skill, it can be trained. In today's story, I want to share how I slowly improved my listening. Not overnight, not with shortcuts, but with simple habits that change the way I learn English. If you struggle with listening, this story might help you see the process differently. Part 1. The day I realized I was not really listening. My journey to improving my listening began with a very simple but uncomfortable moment. One evening, I was watching a short interview on YouTube. The speaker was an American entrepreneur. His voice was clear, and the video even had subtitles. I thought it would be easy. After all, I had already studied English for several years. I could read articles, understand grammar explanations, and even write essays. But after 2 minutes of listening, I realized something strange. I understood almost nothing. The man was speaking at a normal speed. He wasn't using complicated words. Yet the sounds felt like they were flowing together without clear boundaries. Instead of hearing separate words, I heard something like this. Did ya get a chance to see the other project? My brain froze. I paused the video and turned on the subtitles. Suddenly, the sentence became clear. Did you get a chance to see the other project? At that moment, I felt two emotions at the same time. First, relief. The sentence was actually simple. But second, frustration. Why couldn't I hear those words before reading them? That was the moment I realized an important truth. My problem was not vocabulary. My problem was not grammar. My problem was listening training. For years, most of my English learning had focused on reading and memorizing words. I could recognize vocabulary on a page, but my ears were not trained to recognize those same words in real speech. Native speakers do not pronounce every word slowly and clearly like in textbooks. They connect sounds. They reduce words. They change rhythm. Did you becomes did ya. Want to becomes wanna. Going to becomes gonna. When I first heard these forms, they felt like completely different words. That realization changed the way I looked at listening. Listening is not just about knowing English. It is about recognizing English at natural speed. And recognition only comes from exposure and practice. That night, I made a quiet decision. Instead of avoiding listening because it was difficult, I would start facing it every day. Not for hours. Not with complicated materials, just small, consistent practice. At the time, I had no idea that this simple decision would slowly transform the way I hear English. And the first step in that transformation was something surprisingly simple. I stopped trying to understand everything and started learning how to listen differently. Part 2. The mistake that was slowing me down. After that realization, I believed that improving my listening would simply require more practice. So I started listening to English every day. At first, I felt motivated. I watched videos, listened to podcasts, and even tried to follow some interviews with native speakers. But after a few weeks, something strange happened. My listening was not improving very much. Yes, I was hearing more English than before, but the experience still felt frustrating. Many sentences still passed by too quickly, and sometimes my mind would simply give up after missing a few words. That was when I discovered the mistake that had been slowing me down. I was listening passively. Passive listening is when English is playing in the background, but your brain is not truly focused on the sounds. For example, you might play a podcast while cooking, scrolling through your phone, or doing something else. Technically, English is entering your ears, but your mind is not actively processing the language. At first, I believed this method would work over time. Many people say, just listen more and your brain will adapt. But for me, it didn't work very well. The reason was simple. My brain treated the English audio like background noise. If the sounds were too fast or confusing, my mind simply ignored them. One day, I tried a different approach. Instead of playing a long video, I chose a very short clip, less than 1 minute long. Then I listened to that same clip several times. The first time, I only understood about half of it. The second time, I noticed a few words I had missed before. The third time, I started recognizing the rhythm of the sentence. Suddenly, the speech did not feel like a wall of sound anymore. It began to break into recognizable pieces. This small experiment taught me something important. Listening improvement does not always come from more content. Sometimes it comes from deeper attention. Instead of listening to 30 different videos in one day, it can be more powerful to study one short piece carefully. When you repeat a small section, your brain begins to connect the sounds with the words you already know. Slowly, patterns appear. Pronunciation becomes clearer, and sentences start to feel more familiar. That was the moment I realized that improving listening was not about quantity. It was about how you listen. And once I understood that, my entire listening routine began to change. Part 3. Training my ears to hear real English. Once I realized that passive listening was not helping much, I knew I had to change my method. But I also understood something important. If the material was too difficult, my brain would quickly feel tired. When that happens, listening becomes frustrating instead of productive. So I decided to start with something very simple. I began choosing listening materials that were slightly below my level. This might sound strange at first. Many learners believe they must always challenge themselves with difficult content. But when listening is too difficult, the brain spends all its energy trying to survive the audio. There is no space left to actually learn from it. I needed something different. I needed English that was clear, natural, and understandable. So I started listening to short stories, slow interviews, and simple educational videos. The speakers were still native speakers, but their pronunciation was calmer and easier to follow. At the beginning, I had a simple rule. If I understood about 60 to 70%, the material was perfect. If I understood less than that, I saved it for later. This small change made a huge difference. Instead of feeling lost, I began noticing details in the speech. I could hear where sentences started and ended. I began recognizing common sound connections like kind of becoming kinda, a lot of sounding like a lotta, going to turning into gonna. Before, these expressions confused me because they did not match the exact spelling I had learned. But after hearing them many times, my brain slowly accepted them as natural forms of English. Another habit helped me even more. Instead of listening only once, I listened 3 times. The first time, I simply tried to understand the general meaning. The second time, I focused on the sounds and the rhythm of the sentences. The third time, I checked the transcript or subtitles to confirm what I heard. This process was slow, but it was extremely powerful. Each repetition felt like cleaning a dusty window. Little by little, the sounds became clearer. And something interesting started to happen. When I listened to new videos, I began recognizing patterns that I had heard before. The same expressions, the same rhythm, the same pronunciation shortcuts. That was the moment I felt a small but exciting improvement. For the first time, listening no longer felt like chaos. It felt like a language I was slowly beginning to hear clearly. But there was still another obstacle waiting for me. And surprisingly, that obstacle was my own impatience. Part 4. The problem of expecting fast results. After a few weeks of practicing with shorter and easier listening materials, I started noticing small improvements. Some sentences became clearer. Certain phrases sounded familiar. But something inside me still felt impatient. I wanted faster progress. One evening, I decided to test my listening ability again. I opened a fast interview with 2 native speakers discussing business ideas. At first, I felt confident. But after a few minutes, the old feeling returned. The speakers talked quickly. They interrupted each other. Some words disappeared inside the rhythm of natural conversation. Suddenly, I felt the same frustration I had experienced before. Why is this still so hard? I asked myself. For a moment, I even wondered if my practice had been useless. But later that night, I thought about something important. Learning to hear a new language is very similar to training your muscles. When someone starts exercising, they do not become strong in a week. Progress is slow. Sometimes it feels invisible. But the body is still adapting. Listening works the same way. Your brain is building a new ability, recognizing unfamiliar sounds, understanding different rhythms, and processing information quickly. That process takes time. In fact, many language learners quit listening practice too early because they expect immediate results. They listen for a few days, feel confused, and then assume they are not good at listening. But the truth is much simpler. Their brain just needs more exposure. When I accepted this idea, my mindset changed. Instead of measuring my progress every day, I began focusing on consistency. I stopped asking, "Am I good at listening yet?" and started asking a better question. Did I practice listening today? If the answer was yes, I considered that a small victory. Some days I understood a lot. Some days I understood very little. But each listening session was like placing another small brick in a wall. Over time, those bricks slowly built something solid. And after several months of steady practice, something surprising happened. One day, while listening to a podcast during a walk, I suddenly realized that I had been understanding the conversation for several minutes without effort. No subtitles, no pausing, just natural listening. It was not perfect, but it was a clear sign that my ears were finally adapting. And the habit that helped this improvement the most was something extremely simple. It was the power of daily listening. Part 5. The small daily habit that changed everything. After understanding that listening improvement takes time, I decided to focus on one simple rule. I would listen to English every single day, not once a week, not only when I felt motivated, every day. At first, the habit was very small. I only listened for about 15 minutes. That was it. 15 minutes felt manageable. It did not require a special schedule, and it did not feel overwhelming after a long day. Sometimes I listened in the morning while drinking coffee. Sometimes I listened during a short walk. Other days, I listened in the evening before going to sleep. The important thing was not the time of day. The important thing was consistency. During the first month, the change was subtle. My listening still required concentration, and I still missed words from time to time. But something interesting started happening. English sounds began to feel more familiar. It was similar to hearing a song many times. The first time you hear it, everything feels new. But after repeated listening, the melody becomes easier to recognize. Language works in a similar way. The more often your brain hears certain sound patterns, the more natural they become. Another benefit of daily listening was that my brain stopped feeling shocked by English. Before this habit, English sometimes felt like a sudden storm of unfamiliar sounds. But with daily exposure, English slowly became a normal part of my environment. I also noticed that short listening sessions were more effective than long, exhausting ones. When I tried listening for an hour in the past, my focus usually disappeared after 20 minutes. My mind would wander, and the learning effect became weaker. But with shorter sessions, my attention stayed sharper. Those 15 minutes were focused and intentional. And when you repeat 15 minutes every day for months, the total exposure becomes surprisingly large. 15 minutes a day equals more than 90 hours of listening in a year. That realization motivated me even more. Progress in listening is not created by one intense study session. It grows from many small sessions combined over time, like drops of water slowly filling a bucket. And as the months passed, I began noticing another improvement. My brain was starting to predict words before the speaker finished the sentence. This ability made listening much smoother. But it only appeared after I learned to pay attention to something deeper than individual words. I started paying attention to patterns in spoken English. Part 6. Learning to hear patterns, not just words. At the beginning of my listening journey, I believed something that many learners also believe. I thought listening meant catching every single word. If I missed one word, I felt nervous. If I missed 2 words, I felt lost. And when I lost the meaning of a sentence, my attention often collapsed completely. But over time, I discovered that native speakers do not actually listen this way. They do not process conversations word by word. Instead, they recognize patterns. For example, imagine someone begins a sentence like this. On the other hand, even before the sentence is finished, your brain already knows that the speaker will probably introduce a different opinion or a contrasting idea. Or when someone says, "The reason is," you already expect an explanation to follow. These patterns appear everywhere in spoken English. Expressions like, "I think that," "It turns out that," "At the end of the day," "You know what I mean?" Native speakers hear these phrases so often that they recognize them instantly, almost like one single unit of sound. Once I understood this idea, my listening strategy changed again. Instead of trying to capture every word, I began focusing on common phrases and sentence structures. When a speaker started a familiar expression, my brain could quickly predict the direction of the sentence. This made listening much easier. It was similar to watching a familiar road while driving. Even before reaching a curve, you already know which direction the road will turn. Language patterns work the same way. Another helpful habit was listening to similar types of content. For example, if I listened to several interviews about business or personal development, I began hearing the same expressions again and again. Phrases like, "From my perspective." One of the biggest challenges What I learned from that experience. Because these phrases repeated across different videos, they became easier to recognize. Gradually, my brain stopped hearing English as thousands of separate words. Instead, it began hearing groups of meaning. This change made listening faster and smoother. Of course, I still missed words sometimes. That is completely normal, even for advanced learners. But I no longer panicked when that happened. Because when you understand the patterns and the context, missing one or two words usually does not destroy the meaning of the sentence. And once I learned to relax and trust the context, listening became less stressful and much more enjoyable. However, there was one final lesson that helped me improve even further. It was something simple, but many learners forget to do it. I started combining listening with speaking. Part 7. Why speaking helped my listening improve faster. For a long time, I believed listening and speaking were two completely different skills. Listening meant understanding. Speaking meant expressing ideas. So in my mind, they belonged to separate areas of language learning. But after months of practicing listening, I discovered something surprising. Speaking actually helped my listening improve faster. At first, this idea did not make much sense to me. But the reason became clear when I began reading sentences out loud while studying listening materials. When you speak a language, even slowly, your brain becomes more aware of how the sounds are produced. You begin to feel the rhythm of the sentence. You notice where the stress falls. You notice how certain words connect. For example, when I said this sentence out loud, I want to go there. I realized that in natural speech, it often sounds closer to, I want to go there. Before practicing speaking, my ears sometimes missed that connection. But after saying it myself several times, the sound suddenly felt natural. My brain could recognize it much faster during listening. Another useful habit was something called shadowing. Shadowing means listening to a short piece of audio and repeating it almost immediately after the speaker. You do not need perfect pronunciation. The goal is simply to follow the rhythm and flow of the sentence. At first, shadowing felt difficult. The speaker moved faster than my mouth could follow. But after repeating the same short clip several times, my voice slowly started matching the rhythm of the speaker. And something interesting happened. The more I practiced shadowing, the easier it became to understand new listening materials. Because my brain had learned how English moves. Not just the words, but the music of the language. English has a natural rhythm, with stressed and unstressed syllables flowing together. When you only read English silently, that rhythm can remain invisible. But when you both listen and speak, the rhythm becomes much clearer. It is like learning a dance. Watching the dance helps you understand the movements. But actually performing the dance helps your body remember it. Listening and speaking work together in the same way. By combining these two skills, I slowly developed a stronger connection with the sounds of English. And looking back, I realized something important. Improving my listening was never about one special trick. It was about many small habits working together over time. So if you are currently struggling with English listening, I want you to remember something very simple. Difficulty is not a sign that you are bad at English. It is simply a sign that your ears are still learning the language. Listening is one of the most challenging skills for language learners because it happens in real time. Words do not wait for us. Sentences move forward whether we are ready or not. But with patience and steady practice, your brain slowly adapts. At first, you hear only noise. Then you begin hearing words. After that, you start hearing phrases. And one day, without realizing exactly when it happened, You begin understanding full conversations more naturally. That moment does not come from one perfect lesson. It comes from many small listening sessions, repeated over days, weeks, and months. So if today's listening practice felt difficult, do not worry too much. Just come back tomorrow, and the day after that. Little by little, your ears will grow stronger. Thank you for spending these moments listening to this story. If this video helped you feel more confident about your English learning journey, you might consider supporting the channel. You can subscribe so more stories like this can continue to reach learners around the world. And if you know someone who is struggling with listening, feel free to share this video with them. Sometimes a small idea can make a big difference in someone's learning path. Until next time, keep listening, stay patient with yourself, and enjoy the process of learning something new. See you in the next story.